As financing rounds continue to move for private companies, you go from a seed round, round A, round B, round C, etc. Generally speaking, it's not science, but generally speaking, the previous round's valuation is used as a starting block for negotiations on the future round's valuation. So in Daniel Levy and Enoch and Joe Lewis's mind, by valuing the company at potentially $7.5 billion, they have set the precedent for a future negotiation conversation around investment into the club from a third party that might be in the shape of a Qatari wealth fund, for example. Morning guys, how you doing? Welcome back to the Spurs Talk Show. I am Sean Butler. I hope you're all happy and healthy. Please do me a favour guys, smash the like button for me if you haven't had any issues with enjoying the content. Hit the subscribe button for me if you haven't already joined the channel. 16,800 people or so have gone before. Welcome back to them. Welcome to the new. Hit the notification bell and drop a comment. Let me know your thoughts on today's topic. It's football finance time. It's been a while, but we have to get back into it. It's pertinent to Tottenham Hotspur. Manchester United, the takeover that never seems to actually take over, is off, apparently. According to the Mail on Sunday, on the 1st of September, Sunday just gone, an exclusive that was broken by them has ended up costing Manchester United hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in their market capitalization. How many hundreds of millions? Let me tell you right now. $659 million of stock market share price value has been wiped off of Manchester United in a consequence of this exclusive that was broken by the Mail on Sunday, who said that the Glazers are sick and tired of this bidding process. The two bidders, Sir Jim Ratcliffe's Ineos group and Sheikh Jassim's Qatari group, are nowhere near the valuation. And so they're thinking about, or they are going to, according to their source, who's very close to the Glazer family, is saying they're nowhere near the valuation. What's the valuation, you ask? Well, $12.5 billion, £10 billion. And is that a big number or a small number? Well, let me give you a little bit of a backstory for 5 seconds, or a few seconds. On November the 21st, 2022, the share price of Manchester United on the New York Stock Exchange was $13.08 per share. There's 163 million shares in issue, of which about 50 million is what's called the public float, which means it's readily available to people like you or me or Man United fans who want to go and just have a slice of the action. The other 60%, give or take, is owned by institutions or the Glazer family, and so is not really readily accessible. And that is important to know when I finish the story later on. So $13 a share was the valuation of the club at the time, was $2.13 billion, according to the stock market. And the stock market, for what it's worth, and if you're unfamiliar, has access to all readily available information that is known by everybody all at the same time. And so whatever the share price is, it usually is baked in all of the context by smart people who have come to the conclusion that Man United was worth $2 billion, give or take. That night, the Glazers came out and said they're willing to sell the club in its entirety or a significant slice of the pie. They were hoping it would create a bidding war, and to a degree it did, but with maybe not as high a volume of bidders as they were looking for. The share price since then shot up. At its very peak, when Sir Jim Ratcliffe was not going to be beaten by the Qataris, Sheikh Jassim, and they weren't going to be beaten by Sir Jim Ratcliffe when there was overbidding and second and third and fourth rounds of bidding. At its peak, the share price got to $27 and change, which had a market capitalization value of $4.46 billion. That was on the 17th of February. Since then, the share price has fallen back a little bit. And on the Friday before this Mail on Sunday article came out last week, the share price was $23.40, which was a market cap of $3.814 billion. In this article, the Mail on Sunday said that this source, who they know, who's close to the Glazer family, said that the Glazers are just annoyed that the bids are nowhere near what they believe is the right valuation. And Sir Jim Ratcliffe and his group, alongside Sheikh Jassim, have grown incredibly frustrated and disinterested, because every time they go through the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, whatever round of bidding, the Glazers don't give them any indication of where they stand. Who's the closest to getting the bid? Are the Glazers close to selling? And so ultimately, it's a very poorly communicated system, and everybody's tired of everybody else. They broke the news that the Glazers are going to take the company off the market, as in it's no longer for sale, and the share price fell from $23.40 to $19.36, which is a market cap of $3.15 billion, which essentially, as I said, is $650 million lower than it was the day before the news item broke. So a 17% fall happened on Tuesday morning. It's down 29% from its peak, but that doesn't mean necessarily the story's over, because remember that the share price is $13, or was $13 back in November, before the Glazers said they were willing to sell, and that is still 48%, or the current price is 48% higher than it was then. So there's still an indication that a bid will happen. But if the Glazers are going to hold out for a $12.5 billion price tag, which is 4 times higher than it currently is now, and 6 times higher than it was back in November, then it's going to be difficult to see anybody, even the limitless wealth of Qatar, wanting to pay that money, because the inability to get profit from it is going to be an issue. So how does this all affect Tottenham Hotspur? Well, on the first hand, of course, don't forget that both Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Sheikh Jassim, also El Khalifi, the other Qatari wealth fund investor who owns PSG, all 3 of those have been linked with Tottenham Hotspur takeovers. The story in the Mail on Sunday did suggest that if the Sheikh Jassim can't get hold of Manchester United at a reasonable price, then he might turn his attention back to Tottenham Hotspur or to Liverpool, and Tottenham Hotspur seemingly are a more desirable outcome right now. And so there is that kind of direct beneficiary story that we could talk about and hope that there's some truth in it, if you are someone that would like to see the back of the Levy-ENIC tenure, and you would like to have the sort of wealth or access to wealth that these wealth funds have. There's also another indirect relationship to the story here, and it goes back to Tottenham's £150 million cash injection that happened in June of last year. I don't know if you remember us talking about it, but in a nutshell, £150 million was injected, or was made available to be injected at the time. And whilst the financial valuation metrics are complicated because they were broken down into warrants, warrant shares and convertible notes, and the overall dilution of ownership, or the overall valuation metrics, would be dependent on how much of the 150 was taken and at what time. Ultimately, it could have seen a changing of share ownership, where ENIC and Daniel Levy were going to have an additional 1.9% ownership of the shares at a valuation of $7.5 billion, a total valuation of $7.5 billion at its peak, in its most extreme format, for the £150 million. Give or take 2% for £150 million equates to about a £7.5 billion valuation. It's far more complicated than that, and it gets even more complicated when the fact that we've actually only taken 100 of the 150. So it's not going to be the true valuation of Tottenham Hotspur is no longer at $7.5 billion, but that's what it could have looked like. And I believe that is the rationale for why the Glazers have valued Manchester United at 12 billion and potentially priced themselves out of the market. Remember, Manchester United's revenues last year were £640 million. Tottenham Hotspur's were £440 million, so about 45% more than Tottenham's. The reason why companies like ENIC would inject capital at a valuation that is far higher on paper than they know that the club or the company is usually worth or really worth, is because as financing rounds continue to move for private companies, you go from a seed round, round A, round B, round C, etc. Generally speaking, it's not science, but generally speaking, the previous round's valuation is used as a starting block for negotiations on the future round's valuation. So in Daniel Levy and Enoch and Joe Lewis's mind, by valuing the company at potentially $7.5 billion, they have set the precedent for a future negotiation conversation around investment into the club from a third party that might be in the shape of a Qatari wealth fund, for example. The Glazers valued their company at 12 billion, in no small part, in my mind, because Tottenham Hotspur, who are also technically a share price stock market listed company, even though we are delisted from the alternative investment market in London, technically we still have minority shareholders, and technically therefore you still have to operate within the same frameworks of how market listed companies operate. You have to announce things to the market at the same time, at the right time. You have to give out all readily available information to the market, all within the certain rule books and the frameworks of what is legal, etc. Same as Manchester United. So if the Glazers are looking for a comparable business in which to base their own valuation from, then Tottenham represent a fairly good option to do that. And if they are looking at Tottenham's last valuation of £7.5 billion, and then also factored in that Manchester United have 45% higher revenues than Tottenham Hotspur at last year's accounts, then it's reasonable to add an extra 40%, give or take, to the valuation of whatever Tottenham is to find Manchester United's valuation. And of course that gives you a roundabout number of £10 billion or $12.5 billion. That, of course, as I've already mentioned, is 6 times higher than the share price of Manchester United before they announced they were prepared to sell, and so probably has priced them out of the market. What's interesting is that the fact that Tottenham haven't yet taken the last 50 million of the 150 million, and that probably on some level indicates that Daniel Levy and Joe Lewis realise now that the club is nothing like worth $7.5 billion, and in actual fact, by taking the last 50 million at that inflated premium, you're giving away unnecessary money and you're paying for things that just don't exist. And so what might happen is that 50 million might not ever be taken, and there might be a separate injection of capital at a different lower valuation, which might then turn the head of Sheikh Jassim or Sir Jim Ratcliffe or any of the other number of investors that are out there, and they might look at Tottenham and think, they are a ready-made, plug-and-play option for us. We don't need to rebuild the infrastructure. We have secured long-term debt that's far lower than Manchester United's. The stadium is brand new. And to be honest, in the last 90 days, the club has seemingly turned its opportunity or its favour around almost 180 degrees from where we were in the final days of Conte to what seemingly exists right now, which is incredible optimism and positivity around the football club. That maybe, just maybe, some of those eyes that were looking at Manchester United might turn their attention to Tottenham Hotspur and come back in for further negotiations that might end up with Daniel Levy receiving a bid that is too good to turn down. And we might end up with new owners that can then inject the final piece of the puzzle, that final money into the club to buy the players that we need to be able to take us that final stage to compete for everything and eat at the highest table and go on to the things that all Tottenham fans want, which is success on the pitch as well as around it. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Like, subscribe and comment. And as always, bye-bye.